This is the Mercedes EQA, and it's the cheapest way of buying an electric car in Mercedes range. Now, if you peel back the skin, what you actually have here is the piston-powered Mercedes GLA, which is a bold choice given that the EQA's rivals, such as the Audi Q4 e-tron and VW ID.4, are based on electric-first platforms. Does the EQA have what it takes to take on the competition? Well, today we're gonna find out. But before we go any further, remember to give this video a thumbs up if you like what you see, and subscribe for more awesome videos just like this one. From the side, the EQA looks so similar to the GLA it's based off, but it's the front and rear that really sets this car apart, and I'm going to show you exactly what's different. So the main difference, being an electric car, is we don't have a grille at the front. It's just completely blanked off. Now, this is the entry-level sport model, and all sport models get a much more toned-down look. Anything above this is the AMG line, and therefore gets more aggressive AMG-inspired looks, including a grille with two chrome strips either side of the badge. But we don't have that because it's the Sport. You also get a different shape light on the EQA compared to the GLA. They're also adaptive LEDs as standard, something you don't get on the piston-powered car. Further round, this being the Sport, we've got the entry-level 18-inch rims. They do look a little bit lost compared to the rest of the car, and I think makes the car look a little bit dumpy and a bit off. However, they do provide great ride comfort. A little more on that later. You can upgrade to 20s if you fancy it though. And at the back, of course, we don't have any exhaust because this is an electric car. Some chrome highlights down here on the Sport and also on the guard for the boot. But the big differentiator here is the LED light strip at the back of the car. Now, when this lights up, it really gives the car some road presence. There's also an LED light strip at the front of the car, although I think it looks a little bit cheap. The similarities with the GLA continue on the inside because the overall design is pretty much exactly the same as the piston car. But you won't find me complaining about it because the interiors of both cars are lovely and luxurious. For example, all cars come with leather on the seats, the steering wheel, and on the doors. Now, we have the cream option in here, but you can also go for black if you want something a little bit more subtle. The upper section of the dashboard is a soft touch material, but it's contrasted nicely with panels that are definitely not carbon fiber effect. The vents and switches all feel nicely damped and well put together. And I'm a big fan of the steering wheel, which uses physical buttons and switches instead of frustrating touch panels. Some plastic elements feel a little bit on the cheap side, and I'm a bit frustrated that I've got manually operated seats instead of automatic ones in this entry-level car, but overall, fit and finish is top drawer. Not only is Mercedes betting big on electric cars, but it's also majoring on technology at the moment. So even though we're in the cheapest car in Mercedes' electric lineup, it still feels like the company hasn't skimped on gadgetry. A fair amount of the dashboard is taken up by this very sleek panel containing two screens and are powered by Mercedes' MBUX infotainment software. The left panel is a touchscreen containing the infotainment suite. Now, there are lots of menus to get lost in, but when you're sat stationary, it means that you can really set the car up in the way you want it to be. Now, the screen can be operated either using your finger or this little touchpad in the center console, which is actually really intuitive to use. You can also use voice commands like, "Hey Mercedes, I'm cold."
I'm increasing the temperature on the driver's side to 22 degrees.
There are also two touch panels on the steering wheel, which remind me of trackpads from old laptops. The left one controls the infotainment screen and the right the digital driver's display. And speaking of the digital cockpit, it is bespoke to the EQA because this is an electric car and there's plenty of information to view. And overall, the quality of the screens is so high, I think these might be some of the best on the market. Apple CarPlay and Android Auto is thrown in for free, as is a lot of the tech that I've just mentioned. So even if you go for the cheapest sport model like we have here, it's still very well equipped. In the back of the EQA, and it's not quite as impressive as the front. So the good things, leg and headroom is great. So I've got the driver's seat in my position. I'm just under 6 foot, so I fit in pretty much everything, but legroom is still fine. So if you're 6 foot and over, you'll be all right. And the same goes for headroom. Now, what Mercedes has managed to do is it's actually put the batteries towards the back of the vehicle. So you're kind of sitting on top of them. Now, what that would mean is if you had the normal seating position, you'd be kind of through the roof. So the seats are slammed right to the base of the floor. That means lots of headroom, but also your legs kind of stick up a little bit like this. Now, it's not unique to the EQA. I've seen it done in some other electric cars as well, but I thought the ID3 had a really neat solution of where the kind of front of the seat is actually raised a little bit, so it almost feels like you're sitting in a bucket. Because while it seems comfortable sat here for the moment, I think a long journey might feel a little bit strange. I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we've got a power assisted tailgate. The bad news is when you open up the boot, you realize that it's quite a bit smaller than the GLA it's based on. We have 340 litres back here, which is 155 fewer than the GLA. Now that's primarily, again, down to batteries. It affects rear space a little bit and definitely cuts into the boot. In fact, you get a bigger boot on a Super Mini like a Seat Ibiza. Now there is a little bit of underfloor storage, but you'd have to work really hard to cram your charging cables down there. So, as this is a press car, we've got to carry them around in these bags. In the grand scheme of things, the boot capacity isn't too small. You can still get a lot in the back of the EQA, but if you look at something like the Audi Q4 e-tron, which has 520 litres of boot space, well, it kind of blows the EQA out of the park. There's no extra storage up front either. Now, not all electric cars come with a frunk or a front boot, but even something like an XC40 P8 Recharge, which, like the EQA, is based on a petrol-powered car, still comes with a little bit of storage up front to put the cables away. Anyway, while we've got the bonnet open, we can talk about the motor, or motors, depending on which car you go for. Now, this is the EQA 250. It's the entry-level car and comes with a single electric motor over the front axle, producing 190 horsepower. And it'll go from 0 to 62 in a not very blistering 8.9 seconds. Now, above that sits the EQA 300, and that adds a second motor into the mix for a total output of 228 horsepower. And at the top of the range is the EQA 350, which gets the same motor configuration, one at the front and one at the rear, but ups the power output to 292 horsepower, which is quite a lot, and it'll go from 0 to 62 in a slightly more reasonable 6 seconds flat. And they're all based around one battery option, which is a 66.5 kilowatt hour unit. Now, no matter which option you go for, they're all around 265 miles of range, which is quite bizarre because usually the more powerful the EV, the less range that you get. Not that it's a bad thing, it's just a little bit confusing. Also, there's no real long-range version available just yet. Apparently it's going to appear a little bit later in the future, but at the moment, if you want a car with a bit more range, you're going to be looking to the likes of, again, the Audi Q4 e-tron, the Ford Mustang Mach-E, and also the VW ID4. And when it comes time to charge up, the EQA can accept speeds of up to 100 kilowatts, which isn't bad. It means you can go from 10 to 80% charge in around about 30 minutes, but a Volkswagen ID4 can charge up to speeds of 125 kilowatts, and if you go for a Volvo XC40 P8 Recharge, well, that accepts 150 kilowatt charging. Then there's the Hyundai Ioniq 5, which I guess isn't a super direct rival to the EQA, but isn't far off. That is based on 800 volt architecture and can charge at speeds of up to 350 kilowatts, even though those chargers are really hard to find. And if you want to watch my review on the Ioniq 5, why not click the link in the top right hand corner. So how much does this all cost? Well, if you go for an EQA 250 like you see here, you're looking at £44,500. And if you go all the way to the top of the range for the EQA 350, you're looking at just under 50 grand. Now that makes the EQA more expensive than an Audi Q4 e-tron and a VW ID4, but it's about on par with a Volvo XC40 P8 Recharge. Now, it doesn't really have the numbers to compare with its rivals. However, this is probably the most premium feeling cheap EV available, and therefore probably does command a price tag of around 45 grand. Now, if you're tossing up between lots of different electric cars and can't figure out which one to go for, why not head over to yesauto.co.uk, because we've got plenty of new and used deals on EVs. On the road in the EQA, and while this is the cheapest car in Mercedes' electric lineup, it still feels like a premium product to be in and drive. For instance, I'm currently cruising along at about 50 miles an hour, and it is really very quiet in here. Now, on the EQA's bigger brother, the EQC, you get double glazed windows, which you don't get in the EQA, yet still it's very hushed in here. That's partly down to this being an electric car, but also just noise isolation has been handled really well. And because we've got slightly smaller wheels than what you'd find on the rest of the EQA lineup, you know, the AMG line and above, you don't quite have the road roar that you typically get with larger rims. Now we are in the EQA 250, which is the slowest in the lineup, and means we've got a 0 to 60 of 8.9 seconds. Now, if you put your foot down to get up to speed on a dual carriageway, that doesn't feel particularly brisk. We've just hit 70. I'd say it's fast enough. It just doesn't quite have that shove that you expect from an electric car, and it kind of runs out of puff a little bit once you get above 40 and 50 miles an hour. Now, of course, there are faster models. If you go for one of the 350s, you can get that number down to 6 seconds flat, which again isn't super speedy, but bearing in mind that there's no AMG version of the EQA just yet, 0 to 62 in 6 seconds flat in a non-AMG model is actually pretty quick. One area that let down the EQC, which was Merc's kind of first mass-produced electric car, was the ride and handling. But things genuinely feel a lot better in the EQA. I've just got it in comfort at the moment. I'm on a really very beaten road, and it's handling it superbly. It feels comfortable. It's not throwing me around all over the place, or any more so than I would expect from a non-electric car. There's also not a lot of body lean either, so when you are going through the corners, you know, if I go from right to left like that, the car feels pretty much planted. Electric cars weigh an awful lot, mostly down to the battery, and so actually keeping that body roll in check is very, very difficult, but I think this EQA does it really very well. Now, if you fancy taking some of the driving element away from driving, then you've got some semi-autonomous driving modes and safety features. So what comes as standard is an active lane assist. So what that means is if you go close to a white line or slightly over, you'll get a slight vibration on the wheel to tell you to pull back into your lane. But if you cross the white line, it'll actually brake one side of the car to kind of drag you back into your lane, and it really wakes you up. You can also get several semi-autonomous driver modes included as an optional extra, and they include a lane keep assist, which will keep you firmly in the center of your lane, mixed with an adaptive cruise control. So I'm going along at 60 at the moment, but if the car in front of me starts to slow down, I'll slow down along with them. It just means that you can really enjoy the EQA as a cruiser, and while yes, it's going to cost you a little bit more money, I think it's worth going for. So we have an official range of 265 miles in the EQA. It doesn't really matter which one you go for, they're all about the same. That's under WLTP, but in the real world, you're gonna get a little bit less than that. Now, when I started this thing up this morning, I had about 225 miles in the battery. That was with a full tank. However, it's a bit of a chilly day. I've got the heating going, and I've also got lots of other bits of connectivity going as well. So it's not like it's in the most economical setting. Now, I've been averaging around 3 miles per kilowatt hour with relatively normal driving, which is okay, but it's also not brilliant either. Now, in a lot of electric cars, you get something called regenerative braking, which is where you lift off the accelerator and the car gently applies the brakes to put energy back into the battery. You're not going to be able to completely top the battery up while on the go, but it just ekes out a bit more power. Now, on the EQA, you get these paddles on the back of the steering wheel, which you also get on a lot of electric cars, but you can get some really severe regenerative braking in here. So if I press the right paddle, or the plus button, you'll find that it's kind of like coasting. I'm pretty much maintaining my speed, but then if I lift the left paddle, it kind of feels like you're going through the gears on a combustion engine car, and if I push the left paddle again, you get some much more noticeable braking. But there's an even more severe mode, so I'm in D- at the moment, but if you were to go to D-, it's like applying the brakes. And so if you apply the brakes while in D-, it's almost like doing an emergency stop. So as something to drive, the EQA feels like a really great car. You're not paying huge money, again, for the one that we see here. We're looking at around £45,000, but it feels like I'm in a very premium and expensive product. The only thing that really lets it down, though, is practicality, and the range I just think could be a little bit better. But on the whole, the EQA is a really solid second attempt at a mass-produced electric car from Mercedes. So, the EQA, it's really good to drive, but if you look at it on paper, it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Its range isn't as good compared to most of its rivals, nor is it as fast, and I think if you really look at it, it is held back by being based on a car that's really suited for piston technology. That being said, I don't think a lot of people are going to care really. I think they're going to care that it feels nice and luxurious inside, and while the range isn't massive, it's still enough to get you around where you need to go for most day-to-day activities. And if you factor all of that in, the price doesn't seem that bad. But the EQA is just one car in a sea of many lovely electric SUVs, and you can read all about them and even buy them over at yesauto.co.uk.